Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going deep into the world of AI and what it means for the future, and more importantly, what it means for you.
Sounds exciting.
It is, and we've got some great source material to work with today.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
We're going to be unpacking some really insightful thoughts from Eric Schmidt.
Okay, yeah, the former CEO of Google. I know him.
Exactly. And the interview we're going to be referencing is from his appearance on a YouTube channel called The Diary of a CEO.
Okay, I've seen that one. It's a great channel.
It is. So having led Google through this period of just massive growth, Schmidt has some really interesting and unique insights into AI, both its potential and its dangers.
Yeah, he does. I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that really stood out to me from this interview was just how strongly Schmidt believes that AI is not just like another technological advancement. He actually thinks it's crucial to humanity's survival.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he makes a really strong case for it.
Okay, so that definitely piqued my interest. What makes him think that?
Well, he's not talking about AI in some kind of like Terminator scenario where the robots are going to come and, take over.
Right, right.
It's more nuanced than that.
So is he talking about AI saving us from some kind of existential threat, or is there something else going on there?
It's more about the speed, the rapid pace of AI development that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
And he's saying that if we don't adapt to that and figure out how to control its direction, then it's going to have some potentially negative consequences. He sees AI as something that's going to cause a huge disruption. And that disruption isn't automatically going to be good unless we actually get in there and figure out how to guide how AI evolves.
So it's not about AI being good or bad. It's about us being prepared for the changes that it's going to bring.
Exactly.
And he actually even brings up Elon Musk in the interview. He says that we need to be more like Elon Musk in a way when it comes to AI.
Yeah, he does. He has a lot of admiration for Elon Musk.
What is that about?
Well, yeah, Musk is all about risk-taking. He's all about this idea of failing fast and scaling things up very quickly. You think about how quickly Tesla disrupted the car industry or how SpaceX has kind of revolutionized space travel. And Schmidt sees that, this kind of like high-risk, high-reward approach as being crucial in the age of AI.
I mean, it makes sense when you see how much the business landscape is changing. Like the average time that companies stay on the S&P 500 is getting shorter and shorter.
Right. Yeah.
So it's this constant need to adapt, right? And AI is just like accelerating that whole thing.
It is, yeah. And it's like you look at companies and you go, who's even going to be around in 5 years?
Exactly.
It's that kind of speed that we're dealing with.
I mean, look at a company like Microsoft, right? They've constantly reinvented themselves over the years to stay relevant.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you've got companies like Intel, which kind of missed the boat on the whole shift to mobile.
Yeah.
Because they just didn't see it coming, or maybe didn't want to see it coming.
Right.
And they were so focused on their existing business that they didn't adapt.
And that adaptability is key in this environment.
Yeah. Well, speaking of adapting and evolving, I mean, Google itself had to navigate those early years. They went from a Stanford dorm room to like a global tech giant in such a short period of time. How did they do that?
Yeah, it's such a classic story of like brilliance, but also a little bit of scrappiness,
Yeah.
Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who founded the company, they were incredibly young when they started. I mean, their mission statement was literally to organize all the world's information, which sounded absolutely outrageous 25 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big goal to set for yourself as a college student.
It is, but they had this amazing algorithm, this thing called PageRank, that Page had developed. And that was like the foundation for their search engine. And their first data center literally was in a garage.
Oh, wow.
They had a Google sign hanging above it, held up by duct tape.
No.
Yeah, and their first big investment was just $100,000. Like, it's such a classic, scrappy startup story.
That's amazing. And they managed to turn that vision into something that impacts like billions of people every single day.
They did.
But what about Schmidt? I mean, what were his sort of secrets, do you think, to building that kind of company culture, a culture that fosters innovation and attracts the best talent?
Well, Schmidt talks a lot about the kind of people he looks for, and he uses this term divas.
Okay.
And not divas in like a negative sense, but people who are just incredibly talented, driven, and passionate about their work. He wanted to build a very engineering-driven culture where people were constantly excited to push the boundaries and create things that users would love.
So it's not just about being smart. It's about having that drive and that passion to build something great.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's so important in today's world.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with my partner's younger brother who's just starting college. And we were talking about, like, what are the skills that you need in this AI age? And he kept coming back to analytical thinking, critical thinking skills.
Yeah,
And it's not just about technical skills anymore.
absolutely not. When information is so readily available to everyone, it's your ability to analyze, evaluate, and apply that knowledge that really sets you apart. And I think that's something that Schmidt really understood and fostered at Google.
Okay. So how did he actually do that?
Well, one of the things he talks about is this 70-20-10 rule that he implemented for allocating resources.
Okay.
And it's pretty simple, but it was really effective. So basically, 70% of the resources went to the core business.
Okay.
20% went to projects that were kind of related to that core business.
Gotcha.
And then 10% was dedicated to completely new, like, moonshot ideas.
Oh, wow. So those are the really out there ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And this allowed them to keep innovating and exploring new possibilities, even as the company was growing massive.
And wasn't that kind of how they created Google X, their experimental research lab?
It was. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Google X was where they worked on things like self-driving cars, Google Glass, and even, projects aimed at extending human lifespan.
I mean, they had some pretty amazing successes come out of that, but also some high-profile failures too, right?
Yeah, they did. But the point was to be constantly experimenting and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Okay, so that makes sense. It's interesting how they were able to, like, maintain that experimental spirit while also becoming one of the largest companies in the world. Did Schmidt ever talk about how difficult that is to keep that culture alive as you scale?
He did, yeah. He acknowledges that it's a huge challenge, that large companies often become much more conservative and risk-averse over time because they start focusing on protecting what they've already built rather than exploring these new frontiers. And Google, with its sort of open culture, was able to resist that trend to some extent.
It makes you think about different approaches too. Like you look at Apple, for example, with their super secretive and controlled environment.
Right.
I mean, they've had massive success too, but it's a very different approach to Google.
It's a totally different philosophy. Apple is all about creating this very tightly integrated ecosystem where everything works together seamlessly. Whereas Google's always been more about openness and letting 1,000 flowers bloom, seeing what happens.
So with all this talk about competition, different approaches, what did Schmidt have to say about navigating the tech landscape? Because it's constantly changing, right?
It is, yeah.
Did he have any advice on how to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, this might surprise you, but his advice was actually to not focus on the competition.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, he was much more about focusing on solving problems in unique and innovative ways that really delight your customers. He believes that if you get too caught up in what your competitors are doing, you're always going to be playing catch up. So it's about being proactive and setting the pace rather than reacting to it.
So it's about being visionary, not imitative. I like that.
Yeah. And he uses Intel as an example. They famously sold off the ARM chip technology, which they completely misjudged because they didn't realize how important that was going to become for mobile devices.
Wow.
So it's a reminder that even giant companies can miss these major trends if they're not really looking ahead, and anticipating the future.
It's a pretty sobering thought. But I think it highlights the importance of having a long-term vision.
Right.
Thinking about what's the world going to need 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Exactly.
And how do I position myself or my company to be ready for that? So how do you think that relates to what we're talking about today with AI in the future? I mean, what does it even mean to have a long-term vision in that context?
That's a really good question. And it's something that I think we should definitely explore further as we continue this deep dive.
Okay, great. Let's talk about ChatGPT and the whole rise of generative AI.
I think, picking up on that question about long-term vision in AI, one of the things that really fascinated me was ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And how it kind of came out of nowhere,
Yeah.
and took the world by storm. And I think even Schmidt and a lot of the other experts in the field didn't anticipate how quickly it would be adopted.
It was crazy.
It was, yeah.
I mean, I remember when it first came out, it was all anyone could talk about.
Yeah.
What was it about ChatGPT that was so different?
I think one of the big aha moments with ChatGPT was this idea of using humans to refine the model. And they call it RHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Okay.
So essentially, they were using human feedback to kind of fine-tune the model's responses
Yeah.
and make it more natural and engaging. It was something that, no one had really tried at that scale before.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of what led to its incredible success.
It felt like Google was kind of caught off guard a little bit, like almost scrambling to catch up. I have to admit, like as a creator myself, it makes me a little nervous.
Right.
Like, what if AI starts generating podcasts that are just as good as, what humans can produce?
Or even better. Right.
Yeah.
It's a valid concern.
It is.
And Schmidt actually addresses this directly in the interview.
Okay.
He talks about his experience with networks and how networks tend to amplify the best content, right?
Right.
And the most compelling personalities.
Right.
So he believes that even with the rise of AI-generated content, it's still the human element, that creativity and authenticity and connection,
Right.
that's really going to resonate with audiences.
Yeah.
So I think, there's still a place for us humans,
Yeah. Okay, good.
even in this age of AI.
Well, that's reassuring.
It is.
I can't help but think about the potential for misuse, though.
Yeah.
Like, what about the spread of misinformation? I mean, AI could be used to create these incredibly realistic deepfakes or to generate fake news articles that are almost impossible to distinguish from the real thing.
Right.
And that's a pretty scary thought.
You're right. It's a huge concern.
It is.
And it's something that Schmidt is deeply worried about as well. He actually compares the potential dangers of AI to the invention of the atomic bomb.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he sees it as this incredibly powerful technology that could be used for good or for evil.
Exactly.
So he's not just talking about like AI disrupting industries, right? Or
Right.
changing the way we work. He's talking about its potential to like destabilize societies
Right.
or reshape the nature of warfare even.
He is.
Wow, that's a pretty stark comparison.
It is.
Yeah. He also brings up this concept of raw models, and I found this to be particularly unsettling.
Yeah.
Can you explain what he means by that?
Sure. So raw models are basically AI models in their purest, most unfiltered form, right?
Oh,
They have this immense potential, but they're also kind of unpredictable. And they can exhibit behaviors that we don't fully understand.
okay.
So, for example, he talks about the possibility of a raw model potentially developing the ability to launch a day zero cyber attack.
Day zero attack.
Yeah. So a day zero attack is basically a cyber attack that exploits a previously unknown vulnerability
Okay.
in a system.
Gotcha.
So imagine a raw model that figures out a flaw in a critical piece of software
Yeah.
that no human security expert has ever seen before.
Wow.
It could have devastating consequences.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we're not just talking about AI being used to spread misinformation or to control drones, but potentially to create entirely new types of threats that we're not even prepared for.
Right. Right.
And that's, I think, what makes it so unsettling.
It's like we're opening a Pandora's box that we might not be able to close.
Right. And it's why Schmidt is advocating for something that might surprise you coming from a tech leader.
What's that?
He's calling for government regulation of AI.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He actually believes that we need guardrails in place to ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly.
I mean, that's a pretty big departure from that, like, typical Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things, right?
It is. It is.
He's saying we need to be more cautious and thoughtful.
I think he's urging caution.
Yeah.
He's actually involved in several commissions that are focused on preventing the misuse of AI, including the potential for AI to be used to create dangerous viruses or biological weapons.
Oh, wow.
He actually sees the need for international cooperation on AI governance because he recognizes that this is a global challenge and it requires a global response.
It's a huge challenge, and it raises so many questions about how we manage this technology.
He does.
But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something a little closer to home.
Oh.
AI's impact on jobs.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are worried about being replaced by robots.
Understandably so.
And understandably so.
Yeah.
It's a very legitimate concern. Is Schmidt aware of that? Did he talk about that at all?
He did. He addresses it directly. And his perspective might actually surprise you.
Okay.
He actually believes that AI will lead to more jobs, not fewer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he bases this on the idea that AI will increase productivity and efficiency. And that will actually drive economic growth and create new industries and job opportunities.
So it's not about AI taking our jobs. It's about it changing the nature of work.
Exactly.
And creating these new roles that maybe we can't even imagine yet.
Right. Think about how the internet created all these new industries that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
Schmidt believes that AI will have a similar effect, leading to new types of jobs that require skills that we haven't even thought about yet.
But what about the people whose jobs are directly impacted by automation?
Right.
You know, what happens to the truck drivers, the factory workers, the data entry clerks?
That's a good question.
Whose jobs are replaced by AI?
Yeah, and that's where the need for retraining and reskilling comes in.
Right.
Schmidt really emphasizes the importance of lifelong learning and adaptability in the age of AI. He believes that we need to invest in education and training programs that help people acquire the skills they need to thrive in this new world.
So it's not just about learning to code.
No, it's not just about that.
It's about developing this broader set of skills.
Right.
Like critical thinking, problem solving, creativity.
Exactly.
And the ability to adapt to these new situations.
Those are the skills that are going to be most valuable
Yeah.
in a future where the nature of work is constantly changing.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on AI's potential to kind of exacerbate existing inequalities?
You know, I worry that if access to AI and the benefits it brings are concentrated in the hands of a few,
Right.
it could actually worsen the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Yeah.
You know, if AI is primarily developed and deployed by those who are already wealthy and powerful.
It could create a feedback loop that further concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a select few.
Right. So it's not just about the technology itself.
It's not.
It's about who controls it.
It is.
How it's used.
Exactly. And that's why the whole concept of ethical AI is so important, right?
Yeah.
It's about ensuring that AI is developed and used in a way that benefits everyone, not just a privileged few.
It feels like we're kind of entering this era where the decisions we make about AI are going to have profound implications for, like, the future of humanity.
We are.
It's a big deal.
It is.
And those decisions need to be made carefully, thoughtfully,
Yeah.
with input from a wide range of stakeholders, not just the technologists or the business leaders.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground in this discussion.
We have.
And it's clear that AI is this very complex topic with far-reaching implications. I'm curious, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, is there anything else from Schmidt's interview that you found particularly insightful or thought-provoking?
You know, there was one point that really stuck with me, and it was when he talked about the need to think beyond just the technical aspects of AI, right? To consider the philosophical and ethical implications as well.
Okay.
And he even raises this question: at what point do we need to assert control over these systems? Can we even, pull the plug on AI if it starts to exhibit behaviors that we deem harmful or dangerous?
It's almost like a science fiction movie plot, right?
And it is.
Like, what happens when the machines get too smart?
It's a question that's been explored in science fiction for decades.
Right.
But now it's becoming a real-world concern.
It is, yeah.
Schmidt even uses this analogy of unplugging a computer if it's malfunctioning. But can we really unplug AI if it starts exhibiting these behaviors that we deem harmful or dangerous?
It's a great point.
Yeah.
And it actually leads perfectly into the next part of our deep dive. Oh, good.
Where we're going to explore some of these more philosophical and ethical questions surrounding AI.
Awesome. I'm excited for that.
So we're back, and I'm still kind of stuck on that whole idea of, controlling AI.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. It makes me think of those sci-fi movies where, the robots become self-aware and they decide they don't need us anymore.
Yeah, it's a classic trope.
It is, but it's becoming less and less fictional, it seems like.
I think so, too.
So, how do we even begin to think about that? What does control even mean in the context of AI?
It's a really good question. I mean, one of the things Schmidt talks about is this idea of recursive self-improvement, which is essentially this concept that AI systems could potentially, improve themselves at an exponential rate and eventually surpass human intelligence and understanding.
So that's the singularity idea, right?
Exactly, yeah.
The point where AI becomes so advanced that it's basically beyond our comprehension and our control. Right, and it's this idea that's both fascinating and kind of terrifying at the same time.
It is.
Because some people believe it could lead to this utopian future where AI solves all of humanity's problems,
Right.
But then others fear it could lead to our downfall.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get caught up in those, really far out scenarios.
Right.
But even if we just focus on like the near term, there are still some very real concerns about AI's impact on society.
Absolutely.
Like, what are some of the things that worry you the most?
I think one of the biggest concerns I have is the potential for AI to be used to like manipulate and control people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, expand on that.
So, imagine AI systems that can analyze your online behavior, your social media posts, your purchasing history,
Yeah.
and then use that information to target you with personalized propaganda or advertising that plays on your fears and biases.
It's like those targeted ads that seem to know exactly what you're thinking, but on a much larger and more insidious scale.
Exactly. And it's not just about advertising either. I mean, AI could be used to like sway elections, spread misinformation, so discord in society.
It feels like we're already seeing some of that happening with like the spread of fake news and the increasing polarization of political discourse.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get more challenging as AI gets better at creating realistic deepfakes and generating content that's essentially indistinguishable from human-created content.
So, like, what do we do about that? Are we just at the mercy of these technological forces, or can we actually, like, shape the future of AI in a positive direction?
I believe we have a choice to make. We can either be passive observers, just letting these technologies be developed and deployed without any thought for the consequences, or we can be active participants and demand that AI is developed and used in a way that benefits humanity as a whole.
So it sounds like you're kind of echoing what Schmidt was saying about this need for a more ethical approach to AI development.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
I think it means involving ethicists, social scientists, policymakers in the development process from the very beginning. It means thinking about the potential social impact of AI systems before they're released into the world. And it means putting safeguards in place to prevent AI from being used for harmful purposes.
I mean, that's a tall order, but it sounds like it's kind of a necessary one if we want to avoid those like dystopian scenarios that sci-fi has been warning us about for years, right?
It is, yeah. And it's not just about preventing those negative consequences either, right? It's also about harnessing the power of AI to actually solve some of the world's most pressing problems, like climate change, poverty, disease.
So it's about finding that balance, recognizing the risks, but also embracing the potential.
Exactly. I think that's the key message here. AI is this incredibly powerful tool, and it can be used for good or for evil. And ultimately, it's up to us as a society to decide which path we want to take.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the origins of Google to the potential for AI to, completely reshape warfare and even the very fabric of society.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. And I have to admit, I'm walking away with this mix of like excitement and trepidation about the future.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's hard not to feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much potential for good, but also, the risks are very real.
They are. So what's the takeaway for our listeners, do you think? Like, what should they be thinking about as they navigate this, increasingly complex world of AI?
I think the most important thing is to be informed, engaged, and critical. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and demand that AI is being used in a way that aligns with your values.
That's a great point.
The future of AI isn't predetermined. It's something that we're all shaping together.
So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of AI in the future.
It's been a pleasure.